So last time, if you recall, I was telling you the story of us, the history of the human lineage. So I left off at Homo erectus. Now, they were first discovered in the early 19th century and are found throughout Africa and Eurasia and persisted from 1.9 to 10,000 years ago, and perhaps even later again. And this is from the Knowledge Project. According to Live Science, they lived to possibly even 50,000 years ago. That is not a very long time. It might be a long time in the time span of what we imagine, but in the time span of Earth and the time span of even our species, that is not a very long time ago. Humans came about 200,000 years ago. So that's a very big overlap. In a 2013 overview of H. erectus that Van Arsenal published in the Nature Education Knowledge Project, first human height, they were the first that had like a human height, so they were closer to our height rather than being short and more ape-like. And they looked a lot more like us as well. And they did not climb anymore. So all of the traits that had to do with climbing, they'd completely lost. So there was an interesting increase in brain size throughout the lineage of Homo erectus. They were around for a very long time, and they lived in a lot of different environments. So the early ones that lived in closer environments, they were just smarter than Australopithecines. But the later ones were about 60% of the volume of people living today. So they were a lot smarter. And so there's a lot of debate around this whole thing. The fact that it's a big time gap, the fact that their brain size changes so much. Some say that they might be different species. It's a really big thing. We're not going to get into it much today. Anyway, so a study published in 2011 in PNAS suggests that Homo erectus and possibly other earlier Homo species may have harnessed fire to cook food as early as 1.9 million years ago. So that's quite a long time. In 2014, research discovered 250,000-year-old shell carvings, the oldest engravings ever found, belonging to this species as well. They had very human hands, they had basic hunting, they didn't have a sagittal crest anymore, which is the bone attachment for the muscle for your jaw. Humans have a very infant-like jaw bone in terms of apes. We don't have it attached here, we have it attached right here. They also most likely had basic language. There's lots of controversy on this taxonomic level, as I mentioned earlier, and many think that they should be divided up further. It's all still very new to science. We have only been discovering these human species for the last 100 years, really, and all of it has very big implications, so there's a lot to study. One thing that I find really interesting about Homo erectus is that we don't know if they wore clothes or not. And I just think it's really interesting to imagine what would it be like living in the head of someone who cannot conceptualize clothing, but lives in a colder environment. Then we get on to our most recent ancestors, those that we share genes with. From the Smithsonian article, Homohydropogensis, first early human species to live in colder climates. They had a large brain, wide bodies, and they lived in Europe, possibly Asia, and Africa. They used fire, used wood spears, and more ornate weapons to hunt animals. They're a direct ancestor of ours, and also we lived alongside them at our very beginning. Then our cousin, the Neanderthal, Homo Neanderthalensis. From the article by the same name on Smithsonian, they lived in Europe and southwestern to Central Asia. They lived 400 to 40,000 years ago. 40,000 years ago is not a very long time ago. Sure, we didn't have writing yet, but that's very modern humans. We had dogs. They were slightly shorter than wide and wider than humans. Their brains were just as large as ours and often larger, proportional to their brawnier bodies. They made tools, controlled fire, lived in shelters, made and wore clothing, were skilled hunters of large animals, and also ate plant foods, made symbolic and ornamental objects, and buried their dead. The first specimen to be recognized as an early human fossil was of this species' origin, and they were discovered in 1856. We have a common ancestor with them 700 to 30,000 years ago. Interbreeding occurs, and humans vary in amount shared. Most East Asians have at least 2% of Neanderthal in their genes. Then it goes whites and others, and at about 0.3% in Africans. So another group we interbred with was the recent discovery of the Denisovans. With such a recent discovery, there's not much to discuss yet. Another was from the Isle of Flores in Indonesia. This is a bonus one. Homo floresiensis, also known as the Hobbits. The Smithsonian article Homo floresiensis states that they lived in Indonesia about 100,000 to 50,000 years ago. Again, not that long ago. And they were only about 3 foot 6 inches tall. They were recently discovered, and they have tiny brains, large teeth for their size, small shrugged forward shoulders, no chins, receding foreheads, and relatively large feet due to their short legs. So very, very hobbit-like, very interesting. They had stone tools, and their small stature related to their on-continent version relates to island dwarfism. And then there's us, 300,000 years ago to now. That's a very long history. 200,000 years ago, we have modern humans by any standard that you could measure them. Agriculture only began around 10,000 years ago, and writing only 5,000. With this, there's so much history and stories. I wonder if they still survive today in any way. So many of our legends and lore, they have so much life to them. And how many of our ideas from our classic stories, how much of that comes from some long lost memory? Human tradition is oral tradition. And I feel like it's more than plausible that maybe some of our stories and traditions that are reflected over and over throughout the world are from possibly events that had happened to individuals in our history. And it just excites me more than anything. It's such a deep connection to the past, and I feel like it's so beautiful, and I just love sharing all of this. So I hope everyone enjoyed, and I know it's a little bit long, but thank you so much for listening.